Hey folks, Robbie Payne with Chrome Unboxed, and today we're going to be reviewing the HP X360 Chromebook 11. Now this device is actually aimed at the education sector, but they'll be releasing one, likely if HP follows suit, for the consumer market. So this is going to serve as our review of both of those devices. Now this device actually comes to us packing some interesting specs. It's the first production Apollo Lake device that we've gotten our hands on. Second, it has an EMR touchscreen and stylus input, and it comes with 64 gigs of internal storage and 8 gigs of RAM. So all that should add up to a pretty great Chromebook, right? Well, let's find out. So first and foremost, this device honestly kind of feels a little uninspired. From a company that once brought us the HP Chromebook 13 G1 and its slim design and all aluminum build, and even going all the way back to probably what I would consider the first Chromebook that you could really get work done on in the HP Chromebook 14, this design just feels absolutely bland and boring. The plastic is cheap, it doesn't feel good in your hands, and overall it just looks like something that was built maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not really going to pull any punches in this review because I think HP can do a lot better than what it's done in this device. But let's look around this thing real quick. Outside you have some basic cheap kind of sharp edges that hit your palms whenever you're typing on it. It's got a massive bezel that you can't help but notice as soon as you open the device up. And the keyboard, we'll talk about in a second, but the deck of the keyboard is actually pretty flimsy and you can put some pressure on it and see it give pretty easily. Overall, the hinge, though it's 360 and can help it convert into other form factors, is really loose. And if I pick the device up just a little bit too swiftly, it actually falls wide open. The tablet mode, while again is accessible, it's probably too thick and too heavy to actually ever use in that way. And it does have dual cameras, a normal front-facing camera and then the world-facing camera, but both of them are pretty bad. And so when you hold the device in tablet mode and expect to be able to take a shot kind of like with a big awkward camera, the shot's terrible because the camera is not good. Overall, the design of this device leaves a lot to be desired. And for something that comes in at $479 for the model that we're testing, it does go down to $499 for a 32 gig and 8 or 4 gig variation. This device is not great, especially when you consider there are devices on the market like the Samsung Chromebook Plus. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the review. So when we look around the device, we see part of this where HP actually did something pretty good here. We have 4 USB ports total. 2 of them are Type A, 2 Type C, and the Type Cs can be used for HDMI out, they can be used for charging, and there's 1 of each on each side of the device. So that was actually really well done. You have a micro SD card slot, headphone, microphone jack, and a Kensington lock. So the selection of ports around the device is actually well done. And again, aimed at an education market, that's something that really needs to be done right. And HP did do its homework here and did this device justice with this. Moving on to the screen, we're looking at an 11.6 inch 1366 by 768 display. And honestly, that resolution at this size isn't terrible, but as we're starting to see high-res displays all over the place, it's starting to feel a little bit dated. Add on top of that the fact that though this is labeled an IPS display, it really has some odd off-angle viewing. The colors don't invert or change, it's just the brightness off angle is really bad. And overall the display is really dim. I would guess somewhere around 200 nits. So you add that glossy cover over the screen and a dim screen, and it's actually pretty hard to see in a lot of environments. The colors are decent, but the loss of brightness off angle, the glare on the screen, it just makes for a poor experience using the device. And again, I have to come back to the bezel on this thing is just gargantuan. They probably could have fit a 12.5 to 13 inch screen in here if they would have cut this bezel down just a little bit. So up until this point, I've been a little bit tough on this device, but the keyboard, the trackpad, and the pen, which comes in the box, are actually places where HP did some pretty good work here. Let's start off with the keyboard. Good travel, decent feeling keys, and it's pretty quiet when you're using it. Again, I talked about the keyboard flexing a little bit whenever you pushed on it, but overall the key travel on this thing is actually pretty good, and it's actually a joy to type on. Echo that for the trackpad as well. The trackpad is nice and smooth, it's pretty resistant to oils, and the click mechanism is really, really good as well. So I don't really have any nags with the trackpad either. And when we're talking about the pen, overall, there's a lot of people that don't like using Samsung's pen because it kind of feels like a toothpick and it's smaller than a normal pen. HP includes a pen that's normal sized, and it actually has a small clickable capacitive part of the stylus up here. So for apps that take advantage of a finger input, for instance, like Squid, you can actually turn this over and the back side of it would act just as your finger would, which means it's an eraser. So it's kind of nice when you're taking notes. If you need to erase, just turn it over and actually erase with it. So the pen's actually pretty good. It's not the most robust feeling thing in the world. It kind of feels like a Bic pen, kind of light plasticky feel, but writing with it was pretty good. Now, I have to say, with inking, taking notes with this device, for instance, the pen responds really well. The screen responds really well, but the resolution on the screen, because it's kind of blocky and pixelated, actually takes away from the actual feeling of writing, and it makes it feel very, very digital versus feeling analog like Samsung does because of the high resolution display on the Chromebook Pro and Plus. But overall, this is a decent pen, and the pen input and the way the screen responds is actually pretty good. So all the external bells and whistles don't really mean much if the device doesn't perform well. And the opposite's true as well. If it's lacking a bunch of bells and whistles but really performs well, you can kind of forgive some of those things. Unfortunately, this is another place where the HP really struggles. We're looking at an Atom N3350. There is a 3450, which is a beefier processor, but that's not what's in this HP here. And while this one has 8 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of internal storage, there's also an option for a little bit less money that has 4 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of internal storage. I would say, even though we tested the one with 8 and 64, I'd say that if you got the lesser one, it wouldn't make that much of a difference in performance because this chipset kind of struggles. Overall, I know speedometer is the new go-to benchmark, but we still look at Octane scores as well, and the Octane scores on this were barely any better than Braswell. I actually went back and looked at some of the Braswell devices that we tested, and they were getting close to 9,000, and that's just about all I got out of this Apollo Lake chip. And this is the next generation from Intel in this Celeron line. So I was really disappointed with that because I noticed on the day-to-day, it didn't really feel like it was moving very fast. It didn't feel like it was actually an upgrade at all over Braswell, and that's pretty unfortunate to see a generation jump and not to see any real performance improvements. That was kind of a bummer. And overall, I don't think those performance improvements had anything to do with RAM because I use the Chromebook Pro from Samsung on a daily, and it's got 4 gigs of RAM and I never notice. So I don't think upgrading RAM is that big of a deal in this device. So if you are looking at buying it or you're possibly gonna get it for your schools, definitely stick with the 4 gig 32. And lastly, I have to mention again, the price. So for the 32 gig, 4 gig of RAM version of this device, you can get it for about $399. The one we're testing, again, 8 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of internal storage is $479. For that price point, you can easily go and buy a brand new Samsung Chromebook Plus. And a lot of times the Plus is on sale almost down to $400. So you're looking at the same internal specs from a RAM and storage perspective, and the device looks a ton better. It has a much better display and all the upsides that come along with the Samsung Chromebook Plus versus this device, and it probably is going to end up being cheaper. It's not a real hard decision to make. It needs to be mentioned as well that Android apps actually work out of the box with this device, and while they're not running on the latest build of Android, they do work without any extra setup steps in the beginning. So as soon as you log in, you're going to be met with the Play Store and the ability to go ahead and start installing your Android apps. And honestly, they run pretty well on here. It doesn't take a ton to run Android apps. And so the performance with Android apps is actually relatively good with this device. So to wrap things up, this becomes a really difficult device to recommend to basically anyone. With devices like Samsung's Chromebook Plus, a lot of times that are cheaper than this device and perform just as well, if not better, have better screens, much better build quality, and all the same features, it's difficult to say why you should buy this over that. Especially given the fact that we've shown some videos and talked about some stuff on the site that Samsung's Chromebook Plus is actually really, really durable. I mean, guys are jumping on it and walking all over it and all this kind of stuff, and it stands up to those things. So saying that this is an education device and it can withstand a bunch of bumps and all that kind of stuff seems a little silly when you start talking about devices that look and perform like Samsung's and are the same price. And then think about the fact that Acer has a device coming out in the C771, probably in the next few weeks, that's kind of the successor to the C720, That's going to start, the base model of it will start with a Celeron 3855U that will run circles around the Celeron in this device, and it's going to start out at $279, $329 if you add the touchscreen in. So you're coming in $100 to $150 less than this device, and it will run circles around it and outperform it. I hate to knock devices. I hate to do reviews whenever we have to be harsh on devices, but some devices, especially for manufacturers the size of HP, need to have harsh reviews done of them. This device is just not up to snuff. And for the price, I can't recommend anyone buy it. Guys, if you like this and you like videos like this, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, we'll see you.